And Jesus saw that the crowd was running to the scene. Are you getting this picture? This kid is freaking out, and now it's causing such a commotion that everybody's running over to see what's going on. And Jesus is like, all right, I got to take care of this. He rebuked the impure spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, he said, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. Sometimes I wonder, was he dead? I really do. Maybe he was. Everybody standing around thought so. But then Jesus takes him by the hand. And what was a moment ago lifeless body stands up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? See, they'd driven out other evil spirits. They had understood the authority that Jesus had given them, and they had been successful in other instances. Why could we not be successful today, Jesus? And he tells them, this kind can come out only by prayer. I could preach on just that sentence for an hour, but I won't. Jesus didn't pray in this moment. Did you see that? This tells us a couple of things. There is evil and darkness in the world that exists at such a depth that you and I will never crack it. There's evil and darkness that is so real and so strong and so gripping that there is no effort made by man that could have any effect whatsoever on it. It requires direct intervention from the Lord. That is not a cue to give up and say, well, the situation is hopeless. No, instead what Jesus tells us is that moment when we realize the depth of darkness and oppression is far beyond our ability to reach out to these people, that should be a trigger to us to go to the Lord in intercession. That this kind of depth of darkness, this kind of demonic force, that's when we go to God. There are people we're going to be able to help with our own effort and the leading of the Spirit. And there are going to be some situations that I can't do anything about except intercede. Except intercede. And that's not a cue for us to quit. That's a cue for us to intercede. It's a cue for us to hold that person up above our head to the throne of Jesus and just keep them there. Another thing it tells us is that if Jesus didn't pray, it's because He is the one who can intervene. Right? It wasn't Jesus' prayer that intervened for this little boy. It was his father's conversation with Jesus that did. That was a prayer. And this father said, can you help him? Jesus, if you can do anything, could you have pity on us? I believe you. Can you help my doubt? That's a prayer. That's a beautiful prayer. And it's one that was answered by God Himself. The third thing it tells us is that Jesus, at this point, we've already seen Him 4 times go off by Himself and pray. My friend Rob says it this way. He says, Jesus has been making deposits so that in this moment He can make a withdrawal. He's prayed up He's been living in this constant, ongoing conversation with the Father, right? John 13, I don't say anything I don't hear from the Father. I don't do anything I didn't hear from the Father for me to do. He's living in this ongoing reality of prayer. And so when this moment comes when God the Father needs to intervene for redemption and freedom, He's been making His deposits and He has a well to draw from. I want us to see something this morning. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Mark has this way of telling a story, and it's really interesting. Each of our gospel writers tells the story in their own way. And they write their book in a particular way. And Mark has this pattern of telling stories in contrast. Have you seen that? There's this pattern of contrast. Well, this is happening on this hand, and this is happening on this hand, either simultaneously or side by, or one right after the other in succession. But it's he wants us to see this very clear contrast between the ministry of Jesus and the ministry and what's going on in the world around Him. And so he draws these lines very frequently where there's this stark black and white contrast. And I believe with my whole heart that this story of the Day of Transfiguration is one of those instances when he writes this contrast for us on purpose. Now, yes, I think it happened in this way. I'm not trying to say this isn't chronological, but I think the way he writes it is very intentional. In the same way that I could preach this sermon to you this morning and very intentionally highlight a different part of the story than I highlighted last time. I can tell you this story multiple ways, right? He tells us this story this way on purpose. Peter and James and John have this unbelievable, life-altering experience on top of this mountain. And they're literally there, physically present with God the Father. In the smoke, they hear the voice of the Lord. Jesus is changed into His heavenly glory right in front of them. The greatest prophet who ever lived, the greatest leader of Israel, of the people of God who ever lived, are there with them. And they have this high, holy moment on the mountain where they're just like, this is incredible. Can we just live here? Meanwhile, this makes me think of Reading Rainbow. Anybody remember that? They read the book. Meanwhile, back at the ranch. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the mountain, there's a dad, desperate to see his child restored. There's a crowd of people who seem like they should have answers, but they don't. There's a child who's been suffering for years. Physical pain and violence against his body. Attempts on his life. Peter and James and John say, can we just stay on the mountain? It's fun up here. There's no fun at the bottom. There's nothing beautiful, and there's no light and cloud and dazzling white. There's no prophets, and not at the bottom of the hill. There's just darkness and oppression and loss and confusion and a lack of faith. And Peter and the boys are like, oh, it's good for us to be up here. And Jesus is like, let's go. Y'all, it's natural and easy for us to want to stay on the mountain. And I think sometimes in the church we're constantly seeking this mountaintop experience. We're constantly looking for this high and holy moment, which are good. Don't hear me say they're not good. That was good that they were there. It was. Peter's not wrong that it's good for us to be here. He was wrong because he wanted to stay there. I feel like sometimes in the church we're trying to work our way up to this mountaintop moment. Oh, it's going to be clouds and light and dazzling and oh, prophecy. And the truth is, where we're needed is with the desperate dad and his kid on the ground, where they need somebody just to have a moment of faith and intercession to bring freedom. See, there has to be balance. We need those encounters with God on the mountain, but we cannot stay there. Because those encounters on the mountain are designed specifically to ready us to go down and tackle the thing that's at the bottom. And sometimes we come to church and we're looking for church to give us this great feeling. And we just want to sit and soak it all up. Well, what if it's time to go to the bottom of the hill and get our hands dirty? We can't live on the mountain. We're not supposed to put up shelters and stay there. Because if we do that, then there's no hope for the people on the bottom. We have to be ready to encounter the Lord and immediately go to work. Encounter the Lord, go to work. I'm 40 years old. I bet I have not missed 25 Sundays of church in my life. I think that's a high estimation. I don't know if I've missed 10. I've been to the mountain a lot of times, y'all. They only do this once. Jesus doesn't take Peter and James and John up there once a week. 3 years of ministry, they get one mountaintop moment. Every other day, they go to work. We spend a lot of time. We spend a lot of time trying to climb the mountain. When maybe those experiences and encounters we've had with the Lord should be enough to sustain us for a while. But we're constantly just worried about being filled. I want what I need, what I like, what feels good to me, what... And what we're missing out on is the opportunity to see salvation come to the desperate. And sometimes I wonder as we sit here as modern day Christians, and I don't mean just we in this room, I mean we as American Christians in general. I wonder sometimes if the Lord doesn't sit with us while we're playing our songs and planning all of our ministries and programs and schemes, and if he doesn't just say, would you guys just be quiet for a minute? Listen to Jesus. Because there's a world out there that's desperate for something that only He can do. And He's calling you to come with Him down the hill, and you just can't stay up here. Sometimes I feel like our whole church experience is just trying to find the mountaintop. I think we should be doing a lot more hands-on work at the bottom. And that's not fun, and it's not easy. Sometimes it's terrifying. Sometimes it's emotionally overwhelming. Sometimes it's exhausting. But I believe with my whole heart that one real, genuine encounter with God can power your work for a long time. And I'm looking at a room full of people this morning who have such experiences. Tuesday night at Bible study, we were in Crowley, and we were talking about things the Lord has said to us. And Brad's dad, Dwayne, nearly every Tuesday, as we sit and we talk about the things the Lord has done. Honestly, nearly at this point, nearly every time you talk to him, he brings up that when he got diagnosed with cancer, the day after his diagnosis, he opens his devotional book and just by chance scheduled on that day, in a book written months and months and months before, it just so happened that on the day he gets news that he has cancer, he opens it up, and there in his book is a verse that says, "They who trust the Lord will not fear bad news." He hasn't recovered yet from that experience. It's been a year, just about. And he said Tuesday, "I don't think I'll ever get over it." Because in that moment, as he read the word of the Lord, given specifically to him, and maybe that book was written and disseminated to millions of people, it doesn't matter. That word, that day, the Lord spoke into Dwayne's heart for him. And that moment has been fueling him for months and months and months. And you know what? He's never going to get over it. He won't recover from that. Leslie talked this morning about when God delivered her from grief after our 4th miscarriage. She talks about it about 3 times a week. You know why? She can't get over it. It was an encounter with the Lord. It was a mountaintop moment that shifted the innermost parts of her being in such a way that she has never been the same human from that point on. And it has fueled and spurred and empowered ministry for a decade. Y'all, you have some encounters with Jesus that changed you. Let those mountaintop moments be the gas in your engine. Quit trying to seek the next one. He gave you one. Live on it. He might have given you